Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be here. I love coming to Chile, one of my favorite countries. I live in San Francisco, so it's not too far to come down the coast. When I come to Chile, I've been here a few times, I always go to the Museum of History, of Chilean history, the old Palace of Independence, a few blocks from here. I like that museum for a couple of reasons. When I go to museums, I'm very lazy. I'm not interested in reading a lot, and they don't have the English translation. So for me, I can't read anything. I can just look at the pictures, which is a very nice way of experiencing a museum. The other thing I like about the museum is it's small. It's made up of 15 rooms, and the narrative is appropriately linear. I know I have a student who's helping me with my presentation. She's a history student. I'm sure some of you study history or social science. You're, of course, all familiar with your own history, and I assume because you're here, you're interested in the history of the world and the history of technology. And there are 15 rooms in the museum, and its architecture is linear. It goes from the beginning to the end. It's like a book, it's like a story. So it goes from the pre-colonial past, not much, of course, is known about that, through colonialism, through the Spanish conquest, the wars of independence, the 19th century, the growth of a Chilean state, the Great Depression, which, of course, was perhaps the first true global event of the 20th century, the rise of the left, the history of what in America we call the New Deal, the strengthening of the Chilean state. And in the 15th room, and I've been there before, there is, of course, very famously, the broken glasses of your former president, Salvador Allende. That's where your story ends, or that's at least where the story of this particular museum ends, in the 15th room, in 1973. Now, you don't need me to lecture you about your own past, but everybody knows that Allende and Pinochet in particular, and Pinochet's intimacy with the neoliberals in the United States, the so-called Chicago boys of Milton Friedman, who came down to Chile to experiment with their extreme ideology of the free market. The Chilean narrative in the last part of the 20th century was very much bound up in global history, in the rise of neoliberalism, in its challenge to orthodox Keynesianism, and to the experiments, some successful, some, of course, particularly in a military sense, deeply unsatisfactory, tragic in the Chilean context. The history of neoliberalism has shaped, indeed, the last part of the 20th century and perhaps the first decade of the 21st century. There's a historian in America, most of you will be familiar with his name, Francis Fukuyama, who invented a term, the end of history. Only a social scientist, of course, could come up with such an absurd conceit. History never ends, museums never end. And of course, the history of the world doesn't end in that 15th room of the museum over the road in the old Palace of Independence. History moves forward, and while we could generalize the last section, the last moment of world history in a neoliberal sense, in terms of globalization, in terms of the arguments of men like Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, that era has come to an end. It failed, although in some ways it succeeded. Reagan, Thatcher, Pinochet. You know your own Chilean history. I know my Anglo-American history. There's still a great deal of debate amongst historians, but what I think most people agree on is that period has finished. It's ended. The 15th room has closed. So the real question then becomes, as we talk here in January of 2025, already the second quarter of the 21st century. Imagine that. We're almost at the 22nd century. We're in the realm of science fiction. What should that 16th room look like? When you go to the museum, you go out the exit, because history hasn't determined it. But let me just give you some ideas. That's why I'm here. I'm here from the Bay Area. I'm a tech guy, former entrepreneur, writer, journalist. I look at technology. You heard with Victor, who just spoke. He talked to you about Brave New World, Aldous Huxley's vision of a technological future, which was written 100 years ago, ironically enough. We are on the verge, if I want to give you a prelude, a sneak preview like you get at the movies. If you want a sneak preview of the 21st century, of this next moment in world history, it's our age of technology. Many of the speakers today have talked about it. Many of the speakers have talked and will talk about AI and bioethics and tech. It's all about the theme of your conference, humanity. What do we want? How are we going to shape our future in the age of technology, in the age of AI, in the age of bioethics, in an age where we are promised we will live forever, in an age where we are merging with the machine. Outside, you've got images of robots, or already working versions of robots that will become more and more sophisticated as the century moves on. We're on the verge of what AI experts called AGI, artificial general intelligence. We're creating machines that are as smart as us, that are our mirrors, collectively, not individually. So what does that mean? Should we be nervous or excited on the verge of this great journey we are taking collectively as human beings? Now, the great Italian historian Antonio Gramsci, who was a philosopher of history, warned us at the beginning of the 21st century that these transitional times where everything is changing, he argued very famously, that it's a time of monsters. Everyone invents monsters because they're scared of the future. They're scared of that 16th room because they don't know it. We humans, we love familiarity. We like sleeping in our own beds. We like associating with people who reflect us, who look like us, who speak our language. We're not natural voyagers. Of course, Chile and Latin America was founded by adventurers, but they were a minority. They didn't make up the majority of peoples from England or Spain or Portugal who were living in the 16th, 15th, 17th centuries. They were exceptional. Most of us are fearful of this age of technology because it changes everything. Not only does it change everything, it may even change our species. It will change our relationships with each other and our relationships, above all else, with ourselves. Even the idea of what a self is will be radically transformed. Who knows whether we are who we think we are, or whether a machine will be wearing chips eventually by the end of the 21st century that connect us with everyone. We may even know what other people are thinking. So when you're sitting next to one another, you're all thinking, what is that other person thinking? You have no idea. You might try to read the expression on their faces, but we'll all become novelists and filmmakers and poets because we'll know everything, potentially, about that other person. Now, at an event like this, both the left and the right are deeply nervous. On the right, with men like Trump, is a nostalgia for the past, a fetishization of the past. In this moment of great transition, in what people call our age of anxiety, they fetishize the soil and race and the nation. All very old-fashioned ideas, 19th century ideas that may have been radical in the 19th century, with men like your founder, Bernardo Higgins, who of course built the Palace of Independence in that square over the road where the museum is, but totally inappropriate for the beginning of the 21st century. Sure, they may get elected, but I guarantee you one thing, I'm going to swear now, I might get yanked off the stage, they will fuck up. Bolsonaro fucked up in Brazil. Trump will fuck up in the United States. The AfD will fuck up in Germany because they're out of their historical place. They haven't gone to room 16, the future, the place where we are inventing and reinventing ourselves in the 21st century. But you will find the same nostalgia on the left at events like this. People who fetishize expertise, lawyers and engineers and doctors. They idealize an age which is passing because this new technology will make them, for better or worse, redundant. The lawyers and the doctors and the engineers, that technocratic elite who ruled the 20th century, are history. They don't have much of a role in room 16. They're not invited. We all know, of course, Orwell's Room 101 from 1984. That was a terrible nightmare. I don't think room 16 is a nightmare, but it appears so, both from nostalgic conservatives and progressives. Progressives who fetishize unions and a working class that is by definition redundant in an age of AI, where our labor will be done by machines. So why should we be optimistic? Why should we have some faith in the future? Now, some of you may have read Brave New World, Huxley's dystopian take on the future. Victor talked about it. I think he advertised the book at the end of his speech. But Huxley got it wrong. He saw technology as ruling over us. In Brave New World, the religion was of Ford, of industrial titans. In Brave New World, humans were squashed. That's why the narrative in the book is built around a Shakespearean humanist retreat. Now, the phrase in this conference is humanity, what we want it to be. I'm always wary of the word humanity. I always see it being used by reactionaries, people who are clinging to something, because we all define what it means to be human according to our own interests, our own fetishes, our own fantasies, our own biases. And indeed, when you hear people tell you about their fear of the way in which all this new technology is impacting children, that only reflects nervousness. That only reflects the fact that they fear the future and they fetishize the innocence of children to make their arguments. So why should we believe in this? Let me go back to not 1984, to Brave New World, Huxley's great book. If you haven't read it, you have to read it. It's a wonderful book. Lots of stuff about sex, lots of bad English humor, but it's nonetheless an important book. What Huxley got wrong is that he saw the technology that would rule this world of Soma and all the other technological innovations as being external, as being passed down, as not being associated with us. He treated room 16 of the future as if humans hadn't advanced. But here's why we should be, in some ways, encouraged by the future. This new technology is a mirror. It's us. Particularly think of AI. AI isn't some robot dog invented by nasty corporate types, designed to rob us of our iPhones or our identity. Generative AI, which is reshaping Silicon Valley and therefore the world, is our own collective intelligence. It aggregates what we think, it aggregates what we know, and helps us make sense of the world. In a sense, it turns us all into gods. Now, I'm not that stupid or naive to recognize that when you talk about turning us into gods, that's a rather chilling idea and perhaps childish in its own right. But Steve Jobs, the great founder and inspiration of Silicon Valley, used to talk about technology as enabling us to ride a bicycle. It empowers us. So AI, for example, makes us more intelligent. Now, I know all the arguments about Google and OpenAI and Facebook. In fact, I was making those arguments 20 years ago. I wrote a book called Cult of the Amateur in 2007, which was the first book to address the problems of social media and big tech. But now we're moving on. AI is the first native app for the internet. It creates the freedom to make ourselves more intelligent and more powerful. Now, there will be hiccups, there will be imperfections, but that's room 16. That's why we should be excited to get beyond the carnage of neoliberalism, of Friedman and the boys from Chicago and Pinochet and Reagan and Thatcher. Here we have a technology, it's not socialism. Progressives will want to turn it into socialism. It's something new. History is always new. Anyone who's studied history understands that we can't predict the future. But what we can do, and I ask you to do this when you think about these issues, is not think about the future as if it's the past. You've got to get out of room 15 in that museum. You've got to forget the past. I believe, like the museum teaches us, that we humans want independence. That's the foundations of your palace of independence. That's what O'Higgins and your other founders, maybe controversial figures, wanted. We all want independence. Independence from big tech. Independence from government. Independence to realize ourselves. And room 16, I hope, and I can't guarantee you come back and sue me if I'm wrong, but room 16, I think, will be the first opportunity for us to really realize the benefits of this networked intelligence. AI, as I said, it's the first native app of the internet. The previous applications were a failure: social media, e-commerce. We know that we're living through all sorts of problems. But give it a chance. The future isn't quite as bad as it sometimes seems, particularly in the way it's presented by both nostalgic conservatives and liberals. Give it a chance, step into room 16, and you might be happy. Thank you.